Hello there and welcome to our program. In this particular program, we're going to cover that important management report and how to put it together and talk about exactly what the parts of a management report are. Hopefully this will help you define more clearly what you need to look at in terms of improving the way that you certainly put together a report. Of course, you do wish to be effective in your role, and if you do prepare very good reports, then that goes a long way to making your life easier, your boss's life easier, and also you're working very well in your area of responsibility. You also look very professional. It could be that you might have to prepare a report for some international colleagues of yours, or your international counterparts. They could be in London, or they could be in New York, or they could be in other parts of the world. And therefore, the way you put together reports for your bosses or international bosses really will have a bearing on how professional you come across. People look at you, they see you through the eyes of the way you write, through the manners that come out and the tone that comes out in your writing, and also how correct and how well you put things together. They can see your kind of thinking, and this is reflected in the way you certainly put a report together. So writing that report, let's take a look at the various parts of report writing. If we look at format, there really is no set format for a report, but it certainly should contain certain elements. You can probably decide from various software programs that you might see also that there are different ways of tabling a report or getting it together. Some reports look a bit different to others. Certainly it might be the case that your company has a certain template that they like their executives to follow when they are writing reports. And so the whole process is standardized. And this is actually a tool that companies do provide to help their executives write these reports. So it really is a matter of choice. It is a matter of what your company likes to see as well. So it's important to think of that when you're looking at the format of a report. But if you are looking for some guidelines about format, what do you think the general guideline is? Keep it simple. Really don't clutter it. Keep it simple. And that is probably the best guideline you can follow in terms of the format. So let's take a look at the different sections that we see in a report. Of course, there is the title. This should be there because in a short report, this may simply be the front cover. In a long report, you might like to highlight things that are contained in that report on this title page. And you know, it does look very, very impressive when you've got a title page that might have your logo, it has your company name, it has certain details on the front. So the idea is to make it very professional and include a table of contents if there is a lot in that report, so that everything is clearly indicated. Quite often people will use a title page. If it's just a 2-page report, for example, then you don't really need to use a title page as such. But really do take a look and use your preference over things. How do you want to be perceived? If at the end of the day a title page looks good and you've put one together that's very, very effective, then by all means go and use it. It's your choice. The next part of a report, and indeed this is for a medium length report or a lengthy one. It could also be for even a short report of 2 or 3 pages, for example. This part is the executive summary. And really, this is just as the name suggests. It is a summary for the executive who is reading this report. It is a summary that contains all the main findings and conclusions, so that the busy executive, which could either be you might be reading a report, or you might be sending a report to your boss, so that busy executive can get a flavour, we say, or an understanding of what that report says. They can get an idea purely by looking at this executive summary, and they can decide whether or not they need to read it at all. Here, try not to confuse this particular part of the report with the introduction. We will actually go through the executive summary and how to write one further on in this particular program. But normally when you're compiling your report and looking at all the various parts of a report, we come to the executive summary right at the front of the report. It gives a concise account of the main points, as I said, the main conclusions and the main recommendations. So do try to remember that when you are preparing this executive report, that is exactly what it is. This executive summary, I mean. Main points, main conclusions, main recommendations. Not each and every one that you have put there, but the main ones. So, keeping an executive summary brief is also how you should approach it. Keep it very short. It is just a small percent of the total length of your report. And quite often, some managers, especially senior ones who don't have a lot of time, may not read anything else in that report except the executive summary. So this is why you need to place a lot of importance on it. So write it as though it should stand up by itself as a document that can very adequately represent the body of your report. So do bear this in mind when you are preparing your executive summary. It is a very important part nowadays of the report writing process. So keep it brief, keep it free from jargon. As you know by now, jargon is language that is full of technical terms, legal terms, all the sorts of terms that really make things complicated. Keep it free from that so that anyone can actually understand it and get to the main points. This is critical in the way you approach your report. Something that you can do to help you out and to make sure that you're writing it well is write it last. But don't copy and paste from the report itself. This will not work. You need to take from what you've written, rethink it, reword it, and put it into your executive summary. Don't try to take the easy way out. That will backfire for sure, and it will not really have the power that it's supposed to have. Remember, senior managers will go to the executive summary. Some of them, that's the only place that they will go. They will not really go through the rest of it in detail. So remember, you start with your title page. That gives a very good impression when the person receives your report and it's clear what's in it. Then you go to your executive summary. And here you have the main points. Next, we come along to the introduction. Now, this introduction sets the scene for what is to follow. The introduction should contain 2 paragraphs or so. That is a brief summary of the events which have led to the report being written. So you need to explain why you are writing this report. That will make it clear to the reader why they should actually be reading the report as well. So that is a brief 1 or 2 paragraphs. The next thing you include in the introduction is the terms of reference or the objective of the report, why you have actually written it. And here you need to be quite simple in outlining this. You don't need to go into 2 pages as to why you are writing this report or the objective of the report. And you also need to include in your introduction a description of the method the report follows to achieve this objective. So you need to explain very clearly how you're going to go about discussing the issue and the objective of the report. In a way, just imagine that you are talking to the reader, just as you might in a conversation. So here you are putting it down in writing, in your introduction. Let's take a look at an example. It can be seen like a table of contents, but it is a little bit more detailed than that. For example, in your introduction you might say, and you might write, in section 1 of this report we analyse the firm's changing environment. You might add a little bit onto that as well. Then you would move on to, in section 2, we will assess your capacity to respond to those changes. And for example, in section 3, you might say, we will assess the options at your disposal. And in section 4, for example, you might say, we present our detailed recommendations in section 4 and the implementation proposals. So what you are doing is actually putting up little signs as to what you're going to do in section 1, where you will analyse the firm's environment. You're putting up a little sign. Section 2, this is what we're going to do. Section 3 and section 4, this is how you are introducing the body of your report. It really does make things very, very clear. And it means that you have put things in a plan. You have a methodology to how you want to present your information. So we call this signposting because in a way that's what it is. As you drive along a highway and you see signs coming up for the townships that you are approaching and the number of kilometres that you have to go, this is similar to that. So you see what is going on. You can see what is happening as you are introducing the report to your reader. So it's very important in preparing the reader for the delights or the good things to come in your report. It is the first part of the report proper, meaning the actual report itself. And in some ways it's like painting the background to the problem, which is the purpose of your report, and to show the reader why the report is important to them. So you can also give your terms of reference here and explain how the details that follow are arranged. And also remember, write things in plain English. Don't forget the skills that we've gone over, the technical side of writing plain English. Then you are on the way to writing the main part of your report. And here, the main body of your report is really the heart of the report. This is where all the facts are kept. This is where all the facts will be revealed. And this is where all your argument will take place and the way that you view things and analyse things. There may be quite a few sections in this, and you will have several sections or subsections, each with its own subtitle. So you do need to understand that you have to label things and highlight them very, very clearly. This is unique to your report and will describe what you have discovered about the problem. So here we are at the heart of the matter, the heart of your report. And don't forget, these sections, which contain a lot of the information, are most likely to be read by experts in particular areas. So you can use some jargon that is appropriate to those particular areas. It could be that you need to write something highly technical about a software system, perhaps. So you can use certain jargon and specific language in those subsections, for example. But do explain it as you introduce it. So, if you are logically minded, if you have good planning skills, then arrange the information logically. It doesn't take much to get into the swing of things with this, and indeed you should have good analytical skills and reasoning skills anyway as a manager or as an executive in a business. So arrange things logically, and normally you would put things in an order of priority. That means the most important thing comes first. Then you have the second most important thing, the third most important thing, etc. In fact, if you follow this advice in every section of your report, it would be very good to show your professionalism. And it comes out looking very, very good. It means you have thought about the process. It means that you haven't left anything out, and you have given great effort to ensuring that the report is accurate and everything is contained in it that is relevant. So we have the main body, and this perhaps might take you some time to do. If you are very expert or you have a lot of experience in writing reports, then it will be easier for you. However, that does depend on the nature of your report and what is required in that report. Here's a tip for you too. You may like to choose to include a discussion of some format in which you can explain the significance of your findings. You may like to include that as part of the process. So you would say that that is part of your contents, the table of contents. That's something that might bring a little bit of change to a report or something different to a report. And also another tip, when you're writing reports, avoid adjectives like huge or massive or disastrous. These can be exaggerations of things and they're not really very, very clear. So if you're looking at growth or profit loss, you would not say disastrous profit loss, or we anticipate huge growth this year. Try to use a number instead. Numbers are very factual. There's no misunderstanding whatsoever. There's no ambiguity surrounding numbers. So, for example, 50% growth per year, that is very clearly defined by using numbers. It makes your analysis seem more considered and seems more real, more factual. So generalizations and adjectives that are quite extreme certainly are not the way to refer to things inside your report. After you've spent hours of time putting together your main body, which is the very heart of your report, then of course you would move on to the conclusions. And the conclusions present all the final parts of your investigation of the problem, or of the particular progress, we could say, that you are writing about. It may not be a problem at all. It could be a progress report, an update on the progress of your project team. So you would bring everything together and maybe offer options of a way forward from the conclusions that you have come up with. Many people will read this section because they're interested to see at the end of everything what's going to happen from now on, what needs to be done. Your conclusions are written as your professional opinion. So you do need to explain it clearly, precisely as well. You will find that some people might read the executive summary, then flip over immediately to the conclusions to verify the main conclusions you've put in the executive summary. So it's important that you do consider this part very, very carefully. Write it in plain English. And as I said, if you have included a discussion in your particular report, then this section may be quite short. Perhaps this is where the discussion will take place rather than writing a lot about the conclusion. And also think of your conclusion this way too. It is also an analysis of the data in the case. It is the final way, the final description of the findings and conclusions from the analysis, and your recommendations if you are indeed asked for them. So this doesn't mean that you need to put sections or chapters called data analysis, findings and recommendations. You may want to actually use more appealing terms than this. And do remember that if you are dealing with several issues in one report, it may make sense to group the analysis and the findings and the recommendations on one issue together before tackling the next, so that things seem very arranged, so that things are very, very clear and you don't have to look all over the place for analysis of other things that refer to that point. So there is something here to note as well, now that you are coming to the end of your report. Do make sure that the pages are numbered. I have actually seen in my experience reports where the writer did forget to number the pages. So do use those tools on your software. It's very easy. Just click on add numbers, add page numbers, and this makes your report much more professional. This goes without saying, really. And one other thing to remember. You are also advised to number the sections in your report. Number them clearly. Don't get too complicated with 31A-BC. Try to keep it rather clear and methodical and in the right order. When you proofread, make sure that you have somebody also look at the numbering if your report does have lots involved in it and lots of numbering of different sections. Numbering can really help you. Numbering of the pages and numbering of the different points can help you to make cross-references from one part of the report to another part. And also it can help save your words by avoiding repeating in one place what you say again in the next. So cross-referencing is something that will happen when people look at your report, and you can highlight these with the numbers, etc., that you are indicating. Next, we come along to the appendices. And these are there to supplement the points you make in the main body of your report. In this particular section, there is data that is useful for the readers to refer to as part of background information that they may like to confirm or to look at in more detail. Sometimes it's not essential to include anything here, and sometimes these details may not need to be really very thorough. It depends purely on the nature of your report. Sometimes these appendices may discuss subsidiary points that are relevant, and they may demonstrate the depth of your thinking. So it is important to write them very well also. Don't just think because they're at the end of the report that these things don't matter. They certainly do matter. And you do need to be very professional in the way that you write them and you present them. As I said, some people will find them useful, and usually those people are the technical experts, those who look for the finer points, all the figures, all the data. So be prepared to spend some time and making sure that your appendices are very, very accurate indeed. The reader should really not have to look at the appendices in order to understand your conclusions and the reasons that you have reached them. That should be easy to see from the main body of your report. Remember, your main body contains all the relevant points, all the key points, and essential supporting evidence. So if you do need to support your argument with certain quantitative analysis, then the results should be summarized in tables included with the main part of the text. So if you do put something in an appendix, it is vital to include at an appropriate point a reference to it. See Appendix 1 or see Appendix 2, which contains such and such, a detailed analysis of our proposal, etc. So remember, you don't want people flipping back and forth all the time. Don't use the appendix or the appendices section as an excuse to not write a full report. You do need to write that full report. The appendix is a section where people simply refer to certain details, if they need to. So if you don't ask people to look at something, also, don't be surprised if they don't bother. It's up to you to highlight when they might like to look at Appendix 1 or Appendix 2. That's your role, that's your responsibility as you write this report. So think of that point. You are guiding people through this report, just as you are signposting when you highlight in your introduction sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, as you come across all the information you need to talk about, you are highlighting them and pointing them to a reference point in the appendix. Let's take a look now at graphics. And how can graphics be involved in a report? Actually, they are very beneficial to reports, and it might pay that you start to use them, if you are not already using them, to frequently come into different sections where they tend to break up the tedious wording that reports do sometimes have. So it is good practice to use appropriate charts and figures which summarize data and findings. You may get extra credit for doing so. People may think, wow, that was very clear. He's very good in defining this through the use of graphics. I like the way he writes. I like reading his reports. You may get people saying that once you have mastered how to use graphics. Do you use them now? Perhaps you do. But make them a very valuable part of your report. They can really help you significantly, and they can break the report up to make it actually look a little bit more interesting as well. But do make sure that your report makes sense as a standalone document. That means if you use a figure or you use a chart, make sure that its message is very, very clear, or add some narrative to bring out the point. You do need to explain graphics. You do need to make sure that their point is very, very powerful. That's why you're putting them in there, to make a statement, to use stress and emphasis of figures and facts. Sometimes colourful graphics are very, very useful. Sometimes the simplest graphic or chart is extremely powerful in getting a message across. So here, remember, don't use graphics just because you want to make the report look pretty. A pretty chart that says nothing of importance will lose you time and probably marks as well for how effective your report is, whether your boss considers it's a very good report or not. So make sure that the graphics say something. Simply putting in a plot of the firm's sales or profit figures on an Excel graph rarely adds anything. Why not pick out something that's more interesting? Pick out something like profit margins or sales per employee ratios, for example, and use a graph to show how it has been behaving over time. So you do need to be careful how you actually look at graphics and using them in your report. Make sure that what you're trying to say is interesting and powerful and has real meaning. Otherwise, people might think you're just filling up space. You're just putting things in there because they look big and they look nice, and you make lots and lots of pages using graphics. Do remember, people are awake to all these sorts of tactics. So make sure to be effective and to be professional that graphics do have meaning. Also, the kind of graphic you use. Don't use a pie chart, for example, for a time series. Use a line bar or a bar chart for that. So do make sure that your graphics do certainly appear relevant in what they're trying to express. You know yourself what looks good in a graphic or a chart and what is clear and what is not. So when you see a very useful way of putting your information into a chart or a graphic, then catch on to that and perfect it so you can be very impressive with that information. Also, don't forget, flashy presentation, meaning too colourful, too extreme, too much usage of charts, for example, is not a substitute for very clear thinking. A nice colour, a coloured chart or several charts may put a few marks onto the grade of a good piece of work, we can say, but it may not rescue a poor piece of work. So do be careful. People still want to read the words and see your conclusions. Don't throw too much in the way of graphics at them. Don't rely too heavily on the use of graphics. They are there for a reason, and make sure you respect that reason and use them well. If you're not too sure about what graphics or charts look good, get the advice of a colleague. See how you can make new tables and new charts that look different from the ones that you regularly use. Don't forget, there are other ways of putting your data and information into charts. So look for new ways and don't be bored with the old ways. This way your reader will take more interest perhaps too in the way that you present things. It's just a different approach you can consider. Next up we come to tables. And a well-designed table or a matrix is really a very good way too of summarizing data very succinctly. There are many matrices that are available and that we see all over the place when we're looking at things and we're researching information and so forth. So when you are particularly trying to compare things, tables are really very good, or matrices. A matrix is a very good way of doing this. If you are trying to compare things, for example, the features of different products or the performance of different firms, then certainly a well-designed table or a matrix can be very effective. You can also put colour or fill colour in to the body of the table, and that also adds a little bit of impact. If you also are comparing things, for example, the resources possessed by a firm with the success factors in an industry, you could also use a table to demonstrate this. Or even if the features of a different business within a diversified corporation is needed to be shown very clearly, then with a table or a matrix, then go ahead and use this particular tool to be able to show this as well. Make sure things look good. Tables are also a great way of showing your information. I'm sure that you have many at your fingertips that you use, but indeed, as you are analysing your data, bear in mind that the reader may be very able to look at things and absorb things more readily when things are seen in a table or even a matrix. I think a matrix format is probably one of the most popular ways of showing information. And they can become valuable resources that you can use. Again, you might use them in your training or in your sharing of information with your colleagues and staff, etc. So when you design these, they can be very useful in the future. Something to note here and to really keep in mind is that sometimes the process of putting facts side by side in a table will expose important similarities or differences that you had previously overlooked. So when you are actually compiling your table, it may expose these things and it could alert you to the gaps that you have in your data or your analysis. So actually they serve to be very useful. They are very valuable ways because they may open up things that you might have overlooked. I suppose it's because they're very clear and it's very easy to see these things when they're side by side. Usually when things are written in the narrative form, they are less clear and so they're harder to see, particularly where gaps happen. Moving along to the next part of your report, in the recommendations section. Here you do really need to make sure that the recommendations are very clear about what you are recommending. Don't waffle on. Don't elaborate in such flowery terms that the meaning is quite lost. You do have to make sure that it is clear. And it's very, very simple. Remember, the main part of your argument or the objective of your discussion point is made in the main body. At the recommendations section, this is where you need to be very clear. Things should not just be implied, they need to be emphatically stated in the recommendations section. You may have come up with a lot of reasons in this particular example I'm going to talk about just now, particularly about why your company should enter the market in Brazil. You may have 15 good reasons, but unless you clearly state that is what you recommend, then you have not really fulfilled your brief. You have not really gained marks. You have not really completed your mission in writing this report. And why haven't you completed it properly? It's because that you need to make sure that in developing recommendations you follow these several parts. You have to consider the alternatives. There really is hardly ever just one single obvious response to a strategic problem. And also remember this. When you are making recommendations, you have to make sure that in developing these recommendations, you have looked at several issues. You have considered the alternatives. Don't forget there may be alternatives. And there is hardly ever just one single obvious response to a strategic problem. There may be several. And bear in mind, if there are several responses to a strategic problem, all your company's competitors will also have thought of it as well. So you do need to consider alternatives and what your competitors are also considering. In developing your recommendations as well, make sure that you have made it clear why the recommendation you have chosen is the best of the available alternatives. That means showing what is wrong with the others. So first up, consider all the alternatives. Next up, in making your recommendation, choose why you are going to look at the best of those alternatives. So you will have to show what is wrong with the others. And then also, you have looked at the downside of your proposals. Make sure you do that. Try to avoid proposals or recommendations that would bankrupt your company if they failed, or which can easily be copied by the competition. So make sure, as I say again, you've looked at all the alternatives and you've made it clear why you choose the best one over others. Also, ensure that you have looked at the downside of your proposal or recommendation. And try to avoid recommendations that would bankrupt your company. Most definitely. You do need to be very level-headed here. Finally, at the end of your preparation of your report, make sure that you submit work that is intellectually thorough. That means that you have presented it in a very good manner, that you have put a lot of thought into it, and that the kind of wording that you have used is intelligent wording, that you have not talked down to the reader. Show that you have understood exactly what you have put in the report. Also make sure it is well structured, that there is a method to how you have put it together, that it's not confusing in any way. You don't want people rushing back and forth, because it's all messy. That will certainly not win you marks. Next up, the third point is to make sure you submit work that is coherent, it's understandable, and it is logically argued. That you're not talking off in a confusing way. You're not making arguments that have no basis. You have to be logical. Your report is going to your higher-ups, for example, and you need to be able to argue logically about the objective of your report and all the things contained in it. And finally, make sure that you do answer the question, that your report answers the assignment that was set to you, answers how you are updating your project work, answers the problems that you envisage for 2010. Make sure that you do have answers to the questions that have been posed to you in your report. Now that we have concluded that part of report writing, which is a rundown of how it's put together and what the different parts contain, I would now like to go into the executive summary part of your report. And where is the executive summary placed? Can you remember? Of course you remember. It is in the introduction, in the first part of your report. We'll go into some reasons why we do that as we go through this particular section. Remember, the executive summary is integral to your report. If your job, whatever your job may be, maybe you're a sales manager, maybe you are a marketing director, perhaps you are a member of the board of management. Whatever your job is, if it requires that you write memos or emails or PowerPoints and reports that go to mid or to senior level management personnel, you must be able to master the technique of writing executive summaries. Whatever your job is, think about that. Your job not only involves PowerPoints, for example. You may be very excellent, very, very good at PowerPoints and creating them. However, you also will need to be able to write very good executive summaries. And remember some of the things we raised previously, that a summary, an executive summary particularly, is not just cutting and pasting the ideas and conclusions and putting them in another page. It certainly is not that. Most managers today, and indeed you are one of them, are expected to be able to multitask and attend to a significant number of meetings and receiving perhaps more than 100 emails a day. or even more than that. Emails have gone crazy. Sometimes you receive emails that don't really need to come to you, of course. So you have a lot on your plate, we say. You have a lot of things to do every day of your business life. So by starting a communication you might be making, and it doesn't have to really only be a report. By starting any kind of communication you want to make to another party, you can start it with an executive summary. You can help your information stand out from the rest and increase productivity and speed up decision making by using an executive summary in this way. So executive summaries are integral to your report and also to other aspects of your management role. Did you ever think of it that way? Or did you only think that an executive summary was meant for reports? It is interesting to see it from this point of view. So an executive summary, as a powerful executive summary, should really capture the reader's attention. It should generate interest in the topic and inspire that reader to want to know more and to read more. That's the idea, solely and purely the idea of an executive summary. So in an email or a memo, if you want to make an executive summary, it is usually the first paragraph. It could be 2 or 4 sentences in length. That's all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be a whole page, just if you're wishing to express it in email or memo format or procedures. It may also include a few bullet points. And bullet points are very good because they distinguish words very clearly. In a PowerPoint, the executive summary should also be your first content slide. And as with a report, it follows along from the cover slide or the table of contents. So, emails or memos and PowerPoints, in fact, can have executive summaries of their contents, of the conclusions of those particular methods of sharing information. So depending on the topic of your communication, you may want to consider these points. You may want to consider, if my reader only reads the executive summary and skip the rest, what is the most important information I want them to take away? This is something that will help you know how to put together your executive summary. So ask yourself that question when you are preparing your executive summary. It will help you to start to write it up and put it into some shape. The executive summary is an important document of a business report, plan or proposal as well. And when we look at those particular documents, it really is a necessary text that sums up the meaning and the essence of the entire original document. So let's not forget this very important point. It is that part of a business report which is usually read. Most definitely people will go to it first, and usually they will rely on it as being part of the document that helps them see quite clearly what it's all about. And therefore it is placed at the beginning. Placing it at the end of your report or at the end of your document is simply not effective in today's business environment. You have CEOs, you have bosses, you have yourself, for example, as being very busy executives. So you need to look first at what the summary is about, what this thing means. And therefore, that's where you will go to look for information. Remember, people in their jobs have all sorts of commitments. And they will be harassed, they will be wanted by other people to be at different meetings, and they will need to be interrupted when they read reports. Unless they can manage their time very, very well, often reports get interrupted when someone is reading them. So to stop that, the idea is to put the executive summary right at the beginning. So how do you go about writing this executive summary? So to find it beneficial, to make it beneficial for your CEOs or your bosses to read it, the actual document, which is the full document, has a lot of technical information perhaps in it. So a person who is non-technical may not really be able to understand it. Therefore, when you begin to write an executive summary, you do start to look at the language. An executive document is also written for people so that it is the main purpose of the actual document. It does need to be written very clearly so that they can understand it very, very easily. Writing an executive summary is not just about taking out the main sentences, as I said, from the text and clubbing them all together. The summary needs to be clear, it needs to be concise and compact. And you should take out only the main ideas and create a new document that is easy to read. So how do you go about writing an executive summary? You understand fully what your body is about in the main body of your report, and then you put the absolute main points there, ones with the highest priority in your executive summary. You create a new document and you write it as a new document. Don't cut and paste. Don't just add the summary points of your conclusion and recommendations. Think more clearly about how you go about presenting this information in your executive summary. We can also say that it is such a crucial document that the person who is writing it should take the utmost care while creating it. You have to reread it and to jot down important points and ideas. You have to go through it thoroughly to make sure it's not excessive. Remember, this document should only be about 1/10 of your whole document. It should not be detailed and lengthy at all. So this is a guideline that you can use. Keep it to this particular size when you're trying to formulate what goes into it. So it's good to start with a statement that is very compelling and attracts the reader to read more. Start with something that has interest in it, has a little bit of excitement perhaps, or a controversial point in it that will attract the person, the reader, and then they will go on to the next part. The person who is writing this has to make the main document not only shorter but also simpler for the reader. So the executive summary certainly has to be simpler to read. You can maintain the structure of the original document, of course, like the introduction, the main body, and the conclusion. Don't forget those things. You can keep those structures in place. Remember that the main purpose of your executive summary is really to give an overview of the original document so that the reader can read it quickly. So you should only include the important information in a concise manner. And this document, the executive summary, should not have generalized statements. And whatever you write about should be direct and precise. But do not put in there lengthy details, even technical terms, for example. Things that are unnecessary don't need to go in here. You don't want to clutter it up. Remember, it needs to be simple. If in the main body or the main part of the report, a particular problem is referred to there, what you need to do is give the recommendation or opinion in the conclusion part, put that into your executive summary. Don't go on and on about the particular problem. That's not what is relevant in your executive summary. So, along with the content, the language used also matters while you're writing that summary. Use simple language and simple sentences, but do remember that your sentences should be strong and they should be very effective. Don't use such simple language that you insult the reader. The executive summary is a highlight of your report. It too deserves to have good writing skills involved in preparing it. It too also deserves to have the right vocabulary that is going to be very powerful and is going to get the reader understanding in a second what the executive summary is about. And don't forget, after writing an executive summary, you do have to proofread it. Check whether there's also consistency and whether you've covered the main points of the entire document. These are things you need to put in your checklist when you go through and back-check the requirements of your executive summary. Have you missed anything? Is everything there? You could also ask someone who has absolutely no knowledge about the subject to read the executive summary to know whether they understand it. This is also a very good way to get your feedback. And according to their particular feedback, you can make whatever changes you need to make to bring the executive summary up to a more efficient summary. Do rely on others. Do rely on feedback. Don't think that you have to sit there and be all alone in your world of your report writing. Of course, for much of that writing you will be. However, do have others assist you, and feedback is a very good way of getting that assistance. People don't mind because you are actually trying to put together something that is very effective and something that is very good. And also think of it this way too. An effective executive summary should be very reader-friendly. So it doesn't have to be complex, not like the original report. Reader-friendly. That's the theme you should think about, reader-friendly. So as all the points are gained and nothing is missed. So we look at the key components that form the executive summary. There are several, and I'd like to highlight them as we go through this particular session. Here we have the what. What is it all about? These are key phrases you can use that describe and summarize the major points you want to emphasize. What is the executive summary trying to communicate? So use this as a guideline to help you along your way. The what. What is the communication all about? Then you can go to the why. Here, you will have key phrases that engage the reader and explain why the content is relevant to them. Why is this important? Why is this executive summary a very important document? Then you come to the action. If appropriate, then you can clearly state what action you need the reader to take and by when in your executive summary. So we have the what, we have the why, and we have the action that needs to be taken. Also, since the purpose of the summary is to catch your reader's attention, you need to consider these key components. Powerful, concise language. This is the fourth key component. Powerful, concise language will save time and drive some type of action that is required. Powerful words and phrases really are required to make sure that this does happen. So these are four key components that can help you on your way to preparing your executive summary. Let's take a look now at a few examples of how to turn average phrases into more powerful and concise phrases. And this will help you when you're putting together your executive summary. You may already be quite able to do this, but here are some helpful ways that could improve on your skills here. So instead of saying, here are the results of my analysis, which is quite usual, we do see this a lot in report writing or in the executive summary, to make that more powerful, you could say this: the results of my analysis uncovered some unique trends in the 20 to 30-year-old segment that may surprise you. So that in turn is changing the tone and the content of your sentence or your phrase into something that may open the eyes of the reader, and they may want to then listen more. If you just use the standard stock phrase, here are the results of my analysis, you may really, not say it at all. It has no impact attached to it. But if you say, the results of my analysis uncovered some unique trends in the 20 to 30-year-old segment that may surprise you, that has a little bit more power to it. That has more impact and also is a great part of your executive summary. Now let's take a look at the next example, the second example here. Instead of using this particular sentence or explanation, and I'll read it out to you, we've been interviewing a number of candidates for the project manager role, including both internal and external human resource teams which have been involved, as well as Tom, Dick and Harry. Instead of using that particular sentence, you could say, which has a bit more impact, the cross-functional interview team completed 25 interviews for the project manager role and has identified the top 2 candidates. Here you are adding a little bit more impact with more powerful information in your phrases and in your sentences. So try not to stick with the same old routine things or routine way that you present your analysis or your recommendations. Start them off in a different way. Look for perhaps a little bit more creative writing and add a bit of power and also a little bit of concise language that makes things very, very clear right in the beginning, rather than long sentences which tend not to say as much as a shorter and concise sentence. Now I'd like to highlight some samples of an executive summary in different types of executive summaries too. Remember, executive summaries can be utilized for certain different procedures. Here we have an example of an executive summary that concerns results of a data analysis, or it could be results of research. And it goes like this. I'll read it out for you, and you can follow as we go along. Per your request, the operations team completed an analysis of sales performance in the North East Territory. We identified several interesting trends tied to the product line. I've added more detail below and recommend that we meet to discuss the entire analysis. Does Wednesday work for you? So here you can see, in this summing up of the report, it points to the main things. There needs to be a meeting to discuss interesting trends that they have uncovered. So it's clear, it's precise, and it sets a certain sense of urgency to the results of that analysis. So rather than reading through a long type of report and going right to the bottom of the analysis to get details on new trends, right up front in the beginning of this results of the data analysis, there is this short executive summary that highlights action that needs to be taken, as in a meeting, highlights what has happened, as in new interesting trends, and highlights that your team has actually performed its function. Let's move on to another sample of a different type of executive summary. Here we have another example of an executive summary, and it's concerning a project update. Here you can see that it's been put in to point form and numbering of those particular issues. So we can read it together, and I'll begin. It says the new product introduction team made significant strides over the past 3 months and has as follows. Number 1, identified 3 new product lines to differentiate firm ABC from the competition. Number 2, determined the cost and timeline for product development. And number 3, projected sales revenue growth for the first 3 years following product introduction. All 3 points will be covered in this presentation that follows. Here we can see that this particular executive summary has used enumeration in order to highlight exactly the precise things that it has wanting to bring to the attention of their superiors. And these are significant things. There may be lots of other things that they have uncovered, but what they have done is highlighted just the 3 significant discoveries or results. Therefore, you find that the reader is interested. Now he knows that there are 3 main points that have come up over the last 3 months of all of this work, and he's going to read more about that in more detail as he goes through the body of the presentation that follows. Next up, we come to our third sample. And here, this is an executive summary. And here, a decision is needed via email. And so the person writing this is giving a summary of the main points so that some action can be made, a decision can be made. This is a different kind of executive summary. I'll read it to you and we can go through it together. Bob, as discussed last week, we need to determine if we'll fill the open leadership role with John Davis, the internal candidate, or Frank Bingham, the external candidate. Based on my assessment, John's qualification and experience best meet the needs of the position, and he received rave reviews from his current boss, Tom Hopkins. I've recapped in more detail the business rationale below. Do I have your support to move forward with the offer to John? So here we have another kind of executive summary. It's highlighting what the writer really thinks should be done, what his viewpoint is. He has recapped on the details in the following report or the following rationale. And he is asking what action suggesting what action he would like to have taken, and whether Bob, the person he's writing this to, is going to give his support. Now, there could be a lot of details following this selection process of these 2 candidates, and all of that information is very deep and buried in the body of the business rationale that follows. So here we have a summary, an executive summary of a different kind. And this sort of thing can be sent via email. So in closing this particular session in our program, I would like to highlight to you that executive summaries come in different formats. They can be used when you're writing a report, and they form a very critical part of a report, a general management or project update report, or a report for anything really. They also can be used, as you have seen, in highlighting points of discussion or summarizing points of project updates or things that need to be undertaken or decided upon via email. They can be used as successful tools when you want to give results of a data analysis. So, as we have seen, the executive summary is very critical in being the main point of interest to a senior person. When you do try to formulate your executive summaries, there are many guidelines to follow. And there are ways that you can do that by following the points that we have raised here in this particular session. Don't forget, executives don't have a lot of time to wade through lots of things. This is the most important thing you can remember about executive summaries. So make them powerful, make them clear and concise. Certainly look at all the alternatives that do come up and make sure you choose the best option when you are making the points in your executive summary. I do hope that you have gained some very useful information from this particular program that we've gone through together today. And remember, you can become better at the styles that you use when you write. I have said this in the past, and I will leave you with this at the end of this program. Start to practice doing those executive summaries. Start to get input from your colleagues or your boss indeed, so he may guide you along the way to becoming better and better in your written skills. Thank you once again for giving your kind attention to this program, and please do go ahead now and apply them back in the workplace. Thank you and goodbye.